Alright, so patch 1.41 for Guilty Gear Strive has dropped, and with that patch, Arc System Works has namely targeted a couple of bugs that they were able to fix in the short amount of time frame. There are some bugs that they still have yet to fix, as well as apparently reports of new bugs that are being discovered with this patch that Arc System Works will probably have to go and do with in some way, shape, or form. So, without further ado, I wanted to highlight a couple of the new unbugged behavior of certain characters, just so we can properly evaluate the context of their moves. And the first one I want to look at is Ramlethal Valentine, who had a bug fixed with her sword tosses. So, let's go ahead and get into it. So Ramlethal's sword toss was bugged in the previous patch, where previously, if you threw Ramlethal's sword and she got hit out of it, whether it was by a YRC, or if it was by like a burst, or if it was by a move from the opponent, the sword toss would still be fully active and go through, striking the enemy. And depending on the situation, Ramlethal could either then continue her offense, or even pick up a combo. They've addressed this bug, but the question I always had was, what happens to the sword now? Let's go ahead and answer that question with a short demonstration.
Danger. Danger.
As you can see, if Ramlethal Valentine actually sends out the sword and gets hit out of the startup of it, well, the sword toss is now null and void, and it is launched to the ground, and it is under cooldown. This does mean that if Ramlethal gets hit out of the startup of her sword, she now will lose her ability to have access to that sword until the sword is retrieved after it is removed from the ground, or after a wall break occurs. These bug fixes also patch something where Ramlethal's explosion after sword toss would still occur even if she took damage while the sword was out. Now, if she takes damage, like from a yellow Roman cancel for example, the follow-up explosion from sword no longer triggers. As you can see, like after Ramlethal takes a hit from the YRC, the sword becomes inactive and the follow-up explosion no longer occurs. This will also happen if you poke against Ramlethal when she throws her sword and before it detonates. The biggest implication this has for Ramlethal is the means that now she is no longer able to punish a YRC simply by throwing her sword toss. Previously, if the opponent went for YRC as Ramlethal started up her sword toss, well, then the sword would still go through and Ramlethal could still pick up a combo. This meant that while Ramlethal had her swords, the opponent could never really reliably YRC against her because she could cancel into sword toss and punish the YRC attempt. Now, however, if you YRC her out of the startup of her sword toss animation, the sword is stuck to the ground and Ramlethal loses access to that for a while. This means that Ramlethal can no longer easily bait or punish yellow Roman cancels because of the change to the move's intended behavior. Another bug that's addressed in this patch is one that happened with Kai Kisuke and his stun edges, including his charged stun edge move, where he was able to somehow ignore the cooldown on the moves, thus spamming an unintended number of these fireballs. This was particularly noticeable with his charged stun edge, which basically allowed him to set up full screen infinites. And we even had a few examples from clips from Twitter where people were able to execute these in actual games. The timing was pretty tricky before, but now, like, you simply can't ever get another fireball to come out. So this is a bug that has been fixed for Kai Kisuke, which means he no longer has access to a full screen infinite. However, there is still a way for him to basically use this as infinite pressure, or pseudo-infinite pressure, I should say. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. Now, I talked about how it's no longer possible for Kai to spam infinite fireballs, which was a pretty unhealthy thing. However, there is still a bit of tech that was explored in the previous patch, but we didn't really know how viable it was because we didn't know where the bugs began and ended when it came to the charged stun edge behavior. Now that we have this version of the patch and we see that the bug has been patched out, we have been able to confirm that there is actually like an infinite pressure sequence that Kai Kisuke can theoretically do. And it starts with the opponent blocking a charged stun edge. I have the dummy here set to jump whenever they are out of block slot. So as soon as we see that there's a gap, Asuka will jump. Now, if you have a positioning on screen like this and the opponent has the open screen behind them, you are able to run forward towards them and then cause the final hit of the charged stun edge to be a little bit delayed. With that delayed timing, you're then able to set up the next charged stun edge to be a true string, and if you do it properly, it's going to look something like this. Now, I messed it up at the very end there, but that was a true block string. Now, you'll see, though, that once you get the opponent into the corner, it's no longer possible to do this. So you have to have the opponent at a certain part of the screen in order for you to actually go into this infinite pressure sequence, and once you hit the corner, you run out of it. Now, if you do build up enough meter, you are able to do a PRC, jump over the opponent, and continue the pressure into the other side of the corner. To keep things as straightforward as possible to demonstrate, let's go ahead and look at Odawara, who's posted a clip from today, November 20th, about what the best case scenario for this pressure would look like for Kai Kisuke. So we're going to go ahead and watch this play out. Kai Kisuke is going to enter Dragon Install from 100% tension gauge. So we already have a guaranteed PRC in place, and we can see what the whole sequence looks like. He's able to PRC here, go into the next charge stun edge, and start pushing the opponent to the opposite corner. And then he'll do it one more time here. But now you'll see by the end of this sequence, he gets one more PRC, but the opponent is pushed all the way into the corner. Then he's going to have to expend it here to go for a high-low mix-up, and then the opponent dies. Now, this looks like it's an incredibly strong sequence. He was able to true string into like a high-low 50-50 that killed you and basically did all the chip damage in the world. However, it's important to note the proximity of this move as well as to theorycraft around the counterplay of it, right? We'll notice that by the time that Kai Kisuke is into the second sequence of this, right? Assuming the opponent had no tension gauge, which is going to be very unlikely in any sort of match situation, they finally build 50% tension gauge here, assuming that they're not spending any FD. This means that once Kai Kisuke goes for this charge stun edge, the opponent can YRC and end this entire sequence. Not to mention the fact that, too, you also have to initially block the charge stun edge fully in order to be put into this sequence as well. So there are a lot of caveats to this. It's not as accessible as it once was, and there are going to be some system mechanic-based counterplay that will exist because of the system. Now, of course, Kai could PRC, scout out the YRC, and get a punish on you instead. But if he doesn't have access to that meter, you should be able to safely YRC and escape this block string. So this is a lot healthier because previously, if Kai Kisuke wanted to do this infinite, he could access it from full screen, and then YRC basically wasn't going to be able to work because Kai was nowhere near it. And so you had to have your burst. And that's another thing to consider too, that you could use burst theoretically to try and escape this sequence. So I don't feel like this is going to be a mainstay game plan for Kai Kisuke, but rather an edge case option that the character could have if all of these stars align for him to have access to this. So I wanted to break that down to point out the strengths and weaknesses of this particular sequence now that we know that this is some intended behavior that Kai Kisuke has. And just for like a very visual demonstration of the potential counterplay to this sequence, as you can see, if you time your YRC in the startup as Fireball, you basically end the entire sequence. Barring that, a well-timed deflect shield can also allow you to escape the situation. As you can see, if you time this around the time that Kai wants to go close slash into charge stun edge, you create enough distance to where you completely escape from the second fireball. So just keep that particular bit of tech in mind as well. Another small bug fix to mention is one to Leo Whitefang, where previously he was not able to properly use some special moves when he was in his back turn stance. If I did quarter circle forward heavy slash with Leo, instead of getting his Zwite, I would always get back turn stance heavy slash. Now, if I do the input properly, I do get Zwite. So basically, this is just making sure that the character actually behaves correctly, and Leo players should be able to have all of their usual options come out appropriately. Now, another big bug that was addressed in this patch was one that happened with Goldlewis, and this is where if he used a full security level Skyfish near the corner, the opponent would be wall broken, and then they'd still be able to burst in between the wall transition, and if they did that, it threw the entire game out of whack. You know, inputs didn't become responsive, characters were forced into the background of the stage. I've shown a clip of this before on my Goldlewis patch breakdown video for Season 4. However, the way that Arc System Works phrases this patch notes is interesting because it also just sort of tells you how they fix this. And it might actually have some bigger gameplay implications than you'd think initially. So they said that they fixed an issue, making it possible for the opponent to psych burst during the sequence, which would then cause the game to be unresponsive, etc., etc. Now, you might just think that if Goldlewis used Skyfish near the corner and got the wall break on the 51st bullet, as you can see, when you go through the wall, burst is X out, the opponent can't burst through that sequence. Okay, so then they can't create that bug. However, this behavior also carries when Goldlewis isn't getting a wall break. As you can see, throughout the entire duration of that knockdown from Asuka, his burst gauge was completely disabled. Like, he could not burst in those moments. In fact, I'll go ahead and take control of the dummy after the knockdown. I have control, I'm pressing the button. No burst here. So what this effectively means for Goldlewis is if you're in a situation where you have maximum security level and you're able to poke the opponent with Skyfish, if they don't burst or if they don't have burst, then you can advance and cover all of that ground and the opponent can't burst you away. Granted, that is a little bit of a dubious burst to sort of like make in that particular sequence. And you also have to consider the fact that security levels for Goldlewis has a lot of competition across his toolkit now because he has to consider if he wants to save the levels for his Thunderbird special, if he's going to use it for Behemoth Typhoon cancels. So I'm not really sure how often he's going to be able to get it. And you also have to recall that near the corner, it's not like he can do this and get a knockdown and then advance on you and get an OTG that you can't burst because Skyfish is going to break the wall if you're near the corner. So it's very interesting that this is how they chose to fix that bug. It almost feels like a Band-Aid fix at a surface level, just because it's like, okay, so you just made it so I can never burst the 51st bullet after it connects against me. That's very interesting. And, you know, let's go ahead and double check the behavior on block as well. As you can see, the opponent is still allowed to burst, so it's not like, you know, it's like an unescapable chip kill sequence, and it only would apply on the 51st bullet. It's only on a successful hit against the opponent, but still, that kind of feels like, is that maybe something he shouldn't have? That kind of just feels like you're making it so, like, you just don't have to worry about that situation by giving this thing to Goldlewis, instead of maybe addressing some of the situations or the actual coding underneath the surface. I mean, it's a very effective fix, but I'm very curious as to what this means. Again, I'm not sure how big of a deal this is because I feel like, you know, for Goldlewis to get a mid-screen hit with a level 3 Skyfish and then just getting that knockdown in a situation where the opponent's not going to burst the entire sequence to save them a little bit of life, it's probably not going to come up too much. Either the opponent doesn't have burst and so it doesn't matter, or they're probably going to use burst to escape the damage. But if they don't use it, then Goldlewis just gets to advance on them and the opponent doesn't have access to burst until they wake up, which I'm not sure how crazy of a deal that is. I don't think it's too big of a deal, but it is kind of funny, and we'll have to see if there's any sort of gameplay ramifications for Goldlewis that are going forward. Again, this is very much a day one take, surface level analysis. It will take some time for players to sort of explore various situations where this could be something that's very useful for Goldlewis, actually. There are also plenty of other bugs that have been addressed in the patch, like a bug to Kenju, Baiken's Gun Super, to Bedman and one of his follow-up moves from Call 4B9, if I remember the special move correctly. But those aren't really like too huge gameplay dramatic changes for those characters, so I won't really give you examples of those in this video. Instead, I do want to highlight reports that have been coming out since this patch dropped of a new bug that seems to have been added to the mix that Arc System Works should be made aware of, and that is going to be an example of moves randomly unsticking from the wall. So this was the first clip that I have been able to see, brought up in the Discord for the Colorado FGC, and I'm going to let it play out. As you can see, the slash sword toss of Bajento was able to cause an unstick. So instead of Ramlethal getting a wall break here into positive bonus, and then having to play neutral, like Asuka was brought down into the corner and had to hold more pressure because of it. Now, this seems like, oh God, Ram is just absolutely still crazy. This should be very easy for her to set up, but there's some caveats here that I think still have to be explored. Now, to try and best recreate that sequence that we just saw from a real match, we're going to go ahead and try and recreate those hits in training mode. So I have Asuka set to jump. We're going to hit him with a far slash counter hit, and then we're going to hit him with a counter hit close slash, do the same combo sequence as we saw in the corner, and try to unstick him from the wall with a slash sword toss. And we'll see what happens. Counter. As you can see in my particular testing right there, my slash sword toss did not unstick Asuka from the wall. It properly broke the wall. So I don't know what conditions exactly have to be there in order for you to get this behavior. But Ram's sword toss is not the only move that is guilty of this behavior. Now, this clip is something that was posted in the Colorado FGC Discord, and this will demonstrate that Jacko has been documented having this unstick behavior as well. So let's watch it. As you can see here, 2 Heavy Slash was actually able to unstick Soul Bad Guy from the wall, and the move has never behaved like this before in Guilty Gear Strive, and it's certainly not an intended behavior either. So let's go ahead and do a bit of labbing on this. In my own bit of testing in training mode, I have not been able to recreate this behavior from Jacko's 2 Heavy Slash. I'm not sure what it is necessarily to blame when it comes to this bug at the moment. If there's some other underlying coding in the game that's misreading the situation, if it's a height-specific thing, if it's a range-specific thing, some sort of weird character hitbox and hurtbox interaction. But it's been difficult for me to recreate this one, so if anyone out there has information on what makes this bug occur, and if there's any way to make it consistent, which would definitely be an abuse case and something that shouldn't be allowed in any sort of competitive environment, do let us know in the comments below, just so we can increase our understanding of this. That pretty much summarizes the changes to some bugs that had notable gameplay impacts in the previous patch, but there were some other bugs that they also addressed in this patch as well. There was bugs that Chip had with his tightrope run and Bonky Messai Super. Potemkin had a bug with Roman canceling his Potemkin Buncer, which has been fixed. One bug I would love context on was a bug with Faust, where Mini Faust would not behave as intended when hit in mid-air. I'm not sure what that was about, so if anyone has any deets on that particular bug that's been fixed, do let us know in the comments below, because that could be important for the character. They also fixed a issue where the Afro Explosion wasn't triggering a wall break with Faust. Baiken had a bug with her gun super Kenju where it would gain an increased hit count. I would love some extra information about that, as well as information on Bedman's Error 6E follow-up after 4B9, where the attack would hit lower than intended, or higher than intended, excuse me, at a certain altitude. So I'm not sure if this fixes any particular Bedman setups that weren't possible in the previous patch because of the bug. So if a Bedman player out there is able to shed some light on that particular change, we'd appreciate that, as well as a bug to Dizzy where a wall break would not trigger when an attack from Dizzy's frozen state would hit against an opponent stuck to the wall. Now, that's not all the bugs that they document in this patch. There are other bugs with, like, Jacko's Servant Shoot, being able to be dash cancel when it doesn't hit a minion. There's Ramlethal's slash and heavy slash attacks going the wrong way with the swords. Some training mode information, some text command information with an Asuka special move, as well as a couple of other bugs with Faust and his hole-in-one move when it comes to his Afro and Mini Faust item, as well as an accidental cancel of Goldlewis's Behemoth Typhoon. Those are all things that should be addressed in the future, as well as the Ice-Field Momentum bug that we've been seeing in some very funny clips regarding Dizzy. And now there's also these random unstick from the wall bugs that we're seeing in the game as well. So 1 step forward, 2 bugs back kind of seems to be the metric that we're going at right now, although that's very unfair. We haven't confirmed any other bugs at the moment besides like the existence of those accidental unsticks. So Arc System Works has done a lot of cleanup, but unfortunately it seems like a few things are still coming through, and hopefully they'll be able to address these in time. But that pretty much summarizes this video. I simply wanted to document some of the changes because I speculated about certain behaviors and things and had to acknowledge them when I did my character breakdowns. Now that we've seen how some of these corrected behaviors, we're a little more accurately able to look at some of these stronger bugged moves and see how they actually are supposed to behave in the context of the game itself with these bug fixes. So appreciate anyone who's watched this video. I'm going to go play some Guilty Gear Strive now and see what else comes up in my own bit of play, as I'm going to be learning some characters. Peace out.